this session is all about the System 2000 pivot arm awning. Now, pivot arm awnings are certainly suitable for ground floor, but they really come into their own for, I guess, first floor and above, and certainly ideal for installations over doorways because they create a canopy style looking awning as opposed to an automatic awning which pulls down the length of the window. You can use pivot arms on ground floor, and as I said, can create almost a canopy style effect, but just be conscious that it may impede access in certain applications. Now, measuring, it's probably a nice simple awning to measure. Behind us here we've got our awning installation, our product installation house, and we've got an awning which has been pre-fitted here, and we normally go through the process of installing the awning from start to finish. Time constraints are not going to allow us to do that with the pivot arm. It would take us about an hour to get this awning installed, talk about all the features and benefits of the product. So we have pre-installed it to a large degree, and I'll talk through some of those bits and pieces there. So measuring for a System 2000 pivot arm on face. We're on brickwork here. So our recommendation is measure the width of the window or the reveal of where the window is and add a minimum of 300 millimetres. It really just gives us that extra coverage, 150 millimetres either side. The head box. We would ideally like the head box not to be visible from inside the home looking out. So we're saying measure the drop of your window and add 150 millimetres so we can mount above. In this scenario here, where we don't have a lot of space above the actual window opening, we are going to see the back of the head box through the window. Sometimes that can't be helped. If you're measuring to go on architrave, our recommendation would be you'd measure edge of architrave to edge of architrave, and the same on the drop. You'd go top to bottom. Most product and awnings as well look better when they're mounted to the extreme outer edges of that architrave. You can also do a pivot arm, System 2000 pivot arm, in a reveal scenario. So if I wanted to fit it within the reveal, I could do that. With all the bracketry that we have as standard, you can call up angles so that you can mount those brackets in a reveal situation. But what you need to do is measure that opening and take off 10 millimetres, which gives that little bit of extra clearance for those angle brackets that we'll need to use. Excuse me. Head boxes. It's a Zincalume head box. We actually roll form produced this head box here in our factory at Rydalmere. They're fiberglass reinforced end caps. Because of that, it's not ideal to try and powder coat this head box. Comes in quite a few standard colours which match well with a lot of the on-trend colours, and obviously the fabrics and the colours and the stripes that we have available as well. So you've got head box in white, Federation green, mist green, primrose, stony beige, brown, black, galaxy, and anvil and red oxide. So there's a good cross-section of colours there available in the head box. When it comes to installing brackets, as I said, we have pre-installed this. In yesterday's session, we obviously fitted an automatic System 2000 auto lock arm awning. Then we went through this product. The installation of those two head boxes is exactly the same. We have a bracket which sits behind. That is the mounting bracket. Might turn it on an angle, make it a bit easier to see. That is the bracket that you mount, and the head box hooks over the top of that lip on that bracket. We're going to go through some other brackets throughout the presentation. But if you're installing to architrave, you want that bracket to be level with the top of the architrave and flush with the outside edge. Now, when you're doing this, you do want to pre-drill a 3mm hole through that architrave. You really want to make sure you're not going to split the timber or split the architrave. And our recommendation is you fix, these brackets using 50mm by 10 gauge screws. Now 50mm because you want to get through the architrave and you want to tap into the stud that's behind that architrave. I knew it. I tell him every time. You say the word, I wasn't. Say the word stud and he comes in. I don't get it. Anyway, if you're installing to brick or render, okay, our recommendation is that the brackets are going to be fitted at least 50mm in from the edge of the brick, so you're not breaking or chipping away the edge of the brick. If you're fitting up underneath an eave or a soffit, as some people refer to it, you do need to allow 25 millimeters, I guess, of clearance. Again, because the head box comes in and lifts over the top of that bracket. If you've mounted that bracket all the way to the top, you won't be able to clip on your head box. If it's a full brick house and there's bricks above the window, we suggest the bracket should be level at the top of the second brick. And when you're fitting these brackets into brick, drill through the brick. Not ideal to just rely on getting a solid fixing point in the mortar. Now, when you're fixing into brick or into render, excuse me, you want to attach these brackets with a 40mm by 6mm roll plug or an equivalent sort of masonry fixing, and then a 40mm by 10mm gauge self-tapping screws. Now, in some cases, you might want to spread, I guess, the load that that bracket's going to take over more bricks. And I'll just show you what's referred to as a brick fix bracket. Now, this brick fix bracket, and I have to say it slowly because I'll stuff it up otherwise, it's longer than the standard bracket and it spreads the load. So you would put that bracket up with the standard bracket in front of it, and it spreads the load down about another 100 millimeters and helps spread the load out onto the next course of bricks below your mounting point. So if you're a bit concerned that the mortar might be soft, there's a bit of movement in the bricks, maybe it's a slightly high wind area, you always have the option of calling up the brick fix bracket. They don't come as standard. You have to ask for them on your order form. Another thing you can do, if it is a high wind area, you can actually mount, nothing to stop you mounting multiple standard brackets or putting two side by side to give you a more secure fixing point. Now, when we install the head box, those brackets are up. As I said, there's a lip at the top back of the head box, and that just lifting the head box, tilting it back slightly, you hang it in and pop it in there. Now, pop the head box into the brackets. It's just sitting there loose at that point. So you can slide it along and get it centered. And then at the bottom edge of the bracket, you'll see this is the bracket here again. There's a hole at the bottom. So the head box sits in here, comes down and sits flush there. Fixing screws, which we do supply, they're self-drilling 4.8. They're only 5mm in length. I think, no, sorry, they're 5mm in diameter and they're about half an inch long. They're just little self-drilling screws to hold that head box in place to make sure that it can't actually come off. It is very important you fit those screws. When you look at where you're going to mount the arms, now the arms will be positioned within 600 millimeters of the end of the bottom rail. So in this scenario here, got one arm fitted, I'll fit the other one shortly. This is the end of the head box. Here's where I've got my arm. They can be fitted within 600 millimeters of the end, but there are some other rules depending on the size of the awning you need to consider, and we'll have a quick look at that as well. The arm tension. Pivot arm awnings are all based on the spring tension in this arm always pushing away. You can adjust the spring tension in that arm. Just grab this arm before I pop it up and show you. So that is a pivot arm, and the camera's decided not to focus. There we go. There's a cable that runs through the arm and there's a spring here. You'll see here that we actually have three positions here that apply spring tension. When the arms come to you, that little ball at the end of that cable will be in the middle position. I can pull that out and I can pull it up and move it into the top position, which adds a little bit of more tension to the spring. I can move it away to take tension off, although I've never seen a situation where I've wanted to take spring tension off a pivot arm. I'll leave it at that point there. Actually, no, I'll put it back in the other because the arm that we've already got on there has that spring tension ball in that middle point. So you do want the tension on your arms to be the same at both points. When you look at how I've got this arm fitted, arms are installed pointing downwards. Okay, remember there's spring tension on this arm. Okay, doesn't seem like a lot of spring tension, but let me tell you that if that came down and hit you on the head or the shoulder or somewhere, it can cause a bit of injury. So be conscious that that spring is always pushing away. Now, what I'm going to do is just quickly, I've shown you the arm there, I'm just going to quickly pop this other arm up here. You'll see that the actual fixing plate has actually got an open-ended slot and then the final fixing screw. So I can put my screw in there when I've determined my fixing point. I can slot that on and then put my other screw in. But there's also a little trick to working out where this mounting point is. How far down from the head box am I going to mount this arm? These arms come approximately half of the drop you specify of a pivot arm awning. So when you've ordered a pivot arm with an 1800 drop, your arm will be approximately 900 millimeters. Now you could get out your tape measure and calculate your fixing point, but a much simpler way of doing it is when you've got the head box up there, you hold this bracket up under the head box against the wall, and there you can see that's my ideal mounting point for that arm. So that's what I've done there. I'll just pop this other one in, take a couple of seconds. Tighten that top screw before you go lifting that up to tighten the bottom one. You don't want that flying out and that spring bouncing back and causing some damage somewhere along the line. So that's how you determine, I guess, the positioning of that bracket. Okay. We then, as I said, we've installed this. We're going to talk about pivot arm and about the winch system that we use on this. But the next thing we're going to do is actually attach the arms to the front rail. Now, when we look at the positioning of arms, as I mentioned to you, you can actually bring that arm 600 millimeters in from the end at maximum. But there are some things you need to consider. If you want to bring it in 600 mil from the end, you need to have 1800 between it and the next arm. If I want to bring it in 500 mil from the end, I need to have 1500 between that and the next arm. So there is that ratio of 1:3:1. So you can overhang head box and bottom rail with the arm by a third of the distance between the two head rails. So 1:3:1. 600, 1800, 600. Look, in this scenario here, it's a small awning. I've obviously just got the arm set in, I guess, in an ideal position. We've only got an overhang of about 150. As I mentioned, what we're fitting here is a System 2000 internal tape winch, because in the scheme of things with System 2000 pivot arm, it's probably the most complicated install for any of the pivot arms. Now, I guess with the introduction of many motorised options for System 2000 pivot arm, we don't do many of these. But this is the complex one that at least if you've seen it and you've had some exposure to it, all of the others will be much easier to understand. So motorised option. We introduced late last year our Photon 1 solar motor option for our System 2000. You've also got a variety of hardwired motors as well available for motorised pivot arm. And I guess with the trend towards automation and motorisation, more and more people are, I guess they're in the mindset of, yes, I want a quote for motorisation. So we would strongly recommend when you're selling System 2000 pivot arm that the motorised options are the very first things you talk about. And obviously with the Photon 1 solar motor, you can have all that set up and done without the need for a qualified electrician to come along and get that hardwired power to it. You also have external crank. Now, keep in mind, we're saying that pivot arm awning is an ideal awning to use on first floor and above. You don't want to crank, and I think the maximum length crank we will do is about 2100. If you've put a crank operated pivot arm on the first floor window, and you're literally 4 to 5 metres from the ground, we can't supply you a 4-metre crank. It's not practical. If you can get to it from a balcony at a higher level to crank it, great. If it is within a practical reaching height, great. But crank is great if you can obviously reach the actual crank handle. If it's really high, you have another option as well. You can do external rope. Now, with tape here, we've got tape. We'll go through what we've done with the tape, but there's a spool at the end of the actual roller. The tape's going through our brick wall into our home. We'll turn our house around later and show you what we've done. Rope is the same scenario, although rope is used externally. So rope would come out of the same spool through a guide, and it would run through an eyelet. Now, that eyelet has to be mounted directly below the spool, about 100, 150 millimetres, and that rope can be run down a wall. It can be run down a wall from a 2-3 story house or building if need be. Just be conscious that rope creates child safety issues. This is an external product. The child safety legislation is very specific and very strict for corded internal window coverings. There is nothing quite as documented for external, but we're still very conscious as a supplier in the industry that external products with cords and ropes can be just as dangerous as far as strangulation as an internal product. So you are supplied cleats to tie off the rope, and you need to tie it off, otherwise the awning will just roll down. So again, we believe the same rules should apply. Bottom cleat should be 1600 from the ground, second cleat above that. So you're tying off the rope safe at a height that's not reachable by children. You can also have external tape lock. So it's using the tape, and it has a little tape lock, which is a little cam buckle lock assembly which just holds the tape in position. Now, we used to make that as an option for an internal operation where we'd run that tape through the wall, down, and you could use a tape lock inside. Again, it has the potential to be dangerous as far as child safety is concerned. So we no longer offer that tape lock for an internal application, because when you pull the awning up, you end up with a longer piece of tape inside the home. Tape doesn't really lend itself to be tied around a cleat and tied off. You'll end up distorting and damaging the tape. External tape winch and internal tape winch, the componentry and the concept is the same. The winch box is the same. We've mounted our winch box here internally, and we'll show you what we've done through the wall, but that same white winch box can be used externally. Now, this is a winch box that comes from the roller shutter industry. It's not one of our components. We buy it in. When it comes to us, it actually is preloaded with tape around the spool. When you buy a tape-operated pivot arm from us, we put tape around the spool on the awning. So the tape that's on the winch box, you throw away. You discard that tape. You open the winch box, make a note of the direction the tape is rolled around that winch box, but you discard that tape. Throw it away, find a use for it. You don't use it with our awning. So external tape winch, internal tape winch is the same winch box. It's a white, about a 4-inch by 5-inch white box. It's not as UV stabilised as I think we'd all like it to be. So in external applications where it's constantly in the weather, it will have a limited lifespan. When it's internal, I don't think there's ever an issue as far as the longevity of the product. I don't think I've missed anything there, Trev. Okay, so when we talk about, we've got the head box up, I've fitted the arms. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to lift the roll assembly into the brackets of the head box. So if it's tape, we're going to feed the tape, and before we put the roll up into the head box, I actually want to feed the tape through what's just known as a tape guide. Now, this is on the bottom lip of the head box. It may not be fitted. If I can hold that up out of the way. You can see here, there's a little tape guide here. Sometimes that may not be fitted, and it'll just be in the parts or the bag of components that you have, and you may need to fit that, and you can actually angle that to direct the tape to the way you want it to come out. Obviously, if it's rope, it's exactly the same concept, but you'll have a slightly different guide and it'll be a rope that comes down, but it's exactly the same concept. As I said, if you're using rope, you need to fit the rope guide directly below. You don't want to take that off to an angle like we have here. Directly below. It's a rope guide, but it's essentially an eyelet with a thread on the end, and you would put it about 100, 150 millimeters down directly below that spool. So again, the screws that you use are dependent on the substrate you're fitting to, whether it's timber or whether it's brick or render. Obviously with the rope, tying it off on the cleat, like I said, that's what's going to hold the position of the awning. If you didn't tie off that rope on the cleat, that awning is always going to go down to its fully down position. External tape lock, similar process. You have a little tape lock that you can fit externally, and it's just a matter of feeding the tape through that tape lock, attaching the little tassel that we do provide. And that tape lock will always hold the awning, or hold the tape, which will hold the awning in position, and it's manually operated. So, internal tape winch, which is what we're going to look at here today. Now, in most cases, it will be necessary to offset the tape because we're bringing the tape through to the home. We don't just want to bring the tape through the home into a section of wall which has got no support behind it, no stud, nothing behind it. Not Trevor, I'm talking timber stud. So you will need to direct that tape accordingly. Now, if you're doing it in a situation where you've got a full brick home, again, you want to look to where you want that white winch box to be. If you can find somewhere where it can be hidden, perhaps behind some curtains, obviously that's obviously ideal. So what we do, working from the outside here, we've got the awning installed. We want to work out at what point do we want to be drilling through to get the actual tape to go through. So we do want to drill from the inside out all the time. The only time you will drill from both sides is if you have got a rendered finish on a home. You will want to drill mostly from inside out, but the last bit you'll want to drill from outside in to stop blowing out that render. You want to try and find a mortar joint, 250, 300 millimeters below the head box. Find a mortar joint and mark on the window, just with a tiny black text or a dot, mark that point on the window, because all of my drilling from there on is going to be done from the inside coming out. Internally, if you've got windows with architraves, if you have a 40mm architrave, very small, want to drill beside that architrave. 70mm architrave, you're going to be drilling through the architrave. And if it's a rendered wall, drill in about 60 millimeters in from the edge. This will mean you'll pick up a stud and you'll be coming through there. So we're going to mark the position on the inside. We recommend you drill a 6mm hole through the wall, then come through with a 13mm drill. And you'll need a 13mm drill so that the tape, because it is a flat tape, so it's got a nice, clear, open hole for it to obviously, roll in and out from. Again, from inside, after you've drilled through your architrave, if it be, your gyprock, then through the stud, continue to drill with a masonry drill through the mortar from inside to outside. As I said, if it's rendered brickwork, drill from both sides to prevent that blowout. So once I've done that, I'm actually going to fit this. And Trevor, if I can get you to give me a close-up of this spot here. Okay, we have swivel tape plates and guides. So this is a plastic tape plate. One is fitted on the outside, one is fitted on the inside. We'll turn it around shortly. You have the ability to angle that. Okay, I'll move that hand out of the way. But you can actually see we can angle that depending on which angle I've got the tape coming from. So we can angle it in that position. You then actually put a final little screw in the bottom of that so it holds that position. So I've got the tape guide coming out of the tape coming out of the tape guide bottom of the head box. slightly angled that way, and then I've got my swivel tape plate, again angled to the direction that the tape is coming. Then what I want to do is, from the inside, push through a wire hook. An old coat hanger usually works just fine. Push it through to the outside. Hook the tape to that wire, and then pull the tape through the wall. And in some cases, yes, if it's a one installer operation, it can mean inside, outside, up a ladder a couple of times to get all this done. Sometimes you'll have the flexibility of being able to work by reaching out the window, and there'll be other times where you won't be able to. Again, the tape plate fitted with the same fixings that you use for everything else. If we're in render, use the 40x10 roll plugs. If you're timber, then obviously just your timber fixing screw. We're going to turn the house around because we can. Thanks, Trav. Now, the internal tape winch. As I said, when you get the internal tape winch, and I will stand over this side, when you get the internal tape winch, you're going to take it apart. You'll take off the tape that's on it. You can see here on our tape winch, we've just with the texter, we've marked the direction that the tape was rolling around that spool. Because when we attach the tape to that new spool, we want it to be traveling the same direction. Probably should have pointed this out when we had it around the other side, but I can do it here now. We've got the tape coming through. We've left 2 rotations of tape around the spool on the actual awning. We've actually, you can either hold the awning up with a strap or tie it up. We tend to get a little nail or a little, I guess the nail part of a rivet, I don't know what it's called, and we actually just punch it through the tape because we're trying to work here with the winch box, so we don't want the awning falling down. I don't think we can see that there. You can see here what we've done here. I've just put a nail through the tape, okay? And that just stops the tape from being, I guess, taken up into the spool and letting that awning drop down. We want to hold it in that position until we've got the tape winch fixed securely in position. So again, I've now got another swivel tape guide on the inside. And again, I fitted it the same way. Tape's coming through the window. Again, I had the luxury here with our house. I could just put my hand in the wall here and I could run my tape through quite easily. Tape spool is here. It really is then, guys, just a matter of, you would have had a look previously as to where you're going to fit this tape guide, running the tape around, taking up the slack, popping that tape spool back into position, locking it onto the cog, putting on the cover plate. Now you can have this tape spool running that way or that way. You have a couple of options as far as the mounting position for that. We've got plenty of room here, so we've chosen that. There's 2 little screws that hold the tape winch box together. You'll need to do those by hand. We don't ever use the drill or those with those. We don't want to thread out the plastic that's going to help bind that together. And we'll just do those up. A couple of screws into the winch box to put it in the position that we want. I'll just quickly do that up. Again, I mention this a lot, but the fixings that I'm using here are not the fixings you're going to use, because we've got inserts into our installation house here that enable us to fit multiple times into the same point. Okay, so I've now got my tape running through the swivel tape plates, the guides, got my winch box fitted. I've just got a little bit of slack on that. handle goes in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that little nail out. Okay, let's put that there. So now when I drop that down, the awning is now being held up by the tape winch. So as I operate the awning, as you can see it going down. So I've fitted my internal tape winch here. Again, you know, the box is what it is. We don't have any other option here. That is the box. Put it somewhere ideally that can be hidden. You can have that come lower down the wall and maybe have that behind some furniture or something. You only really need to put the handle in when you're actually wanting to operate the awning, and then the handle can come out, pop it in a drawer, pop it in a cabinet, out of place. So the next thing we're going to do is attach our arms to the actual front rail of this awning. Okay? But before I do that, I am just going to run the awning up and down a couple of times. Just make sure that it is working okay. Gives me the full, I guess, extreme sort of bottom limit and everything, and it seems to be working fine. So what we'll do now is we'll actually fit the arms to that awning. So we'll turn our house around again. Now, smaller awnings can be a little bit tricky to get those arms clicked on at exactly the same point. Larger awnings tend to be a little bit easier because you get a little bit of flex and movement in the front rail. So we'll just click on get our position ready. 1, 2, 3. All right, so we've got both arms connected to there now. So I'll just roll that awning up. Just going to turn this on the side a bit, Trev, because what I want you to see is the operation of what a pivot arm does. So obviously the length of that arm or the projection of that arm does not change. So you can see pivot arm goes up, comes down, and when you look to where a pivot arm is designed to end up, that's about the maximum that you would take that pivot arm down. Once you go past about that 3/4 point, you've not really got much spring tension on those arms at all. As I said, the arms are always wanting to push down, but when I go further than that, I really go past the point of having any spring tension. Now, we need to do a couple of things now. There's again. That's all right. I want to make sure the arms are vertical. I want to make sure they're straight. So sort of like I did when I put the head box into the bracket, I got it centered. I'm going to look at these arms, and I'm just going to, in fact, that arm is pretty straight as it is. That one there, just tap them across. You want them to be straight. I mean, you could get your spirit level out, put it on it, and get it perfectly vertical if you wanted to. But as long as it's sitting nice and vertical to the eye, obviously it's going to be just fine. Now then, you've got 4, again, self-drilling screws that are supplied, and these little screws go in, one to the front and one to the back. So one at the front and one at the back to make sure that that seat clip-on section of that arm does not come off the front rail. It's very important because in a high wind situation, they may come off. They've already put these in a few times, so obviously that's hence the reason that found a different point there. So self-drilling screws, top and bottom, to hold that in place. So we've checked the awning was operating correctly. We've now secured it using those little 8-gauge self-tapping screws. Peel the plastic off the head box. Give the awning a clean up around the site, vacuum up any mess that you may have put inside the consumer's home because you've been drilling through their gyprock, through their wall, through their brickwork. Show the customer how to operate the awning and what the awning does. Now, as I was saying, the options and the standard features of this awning are the actual arm size is going to be approximately half of the awning drop. Keep in mind, I've personally never seen a pivot arm with an arm bigger than 900. We do have a maximum of 1500, but let me tell you, a 1500 arm is an extremely long pivot arm, and I doubt that you would sell many in that application. We've chosen on this awning here to have this skin made in our screen fabric. Now, when we use the screen fabric, we're not hemming or sewing the edge. It's a clean cut welded edge, so it's nice and straight. It's a really nice finish. We've chosen not to have a valance, but the valance is standard, and if you want the valance, you specify what you would like and obviously the size on your order form. You can have a scalloped valance, which is obviously your wavy valance in 150 or 200 millimeters. We really only see that done when we've got a striped pattern on a canvas or acrylic fabric. We'd probably do more straight valances than anything else these days because most people go with a plain non-striped fabric. In canvas and acrylic fabrics, you can select to have self-hemmed or binded or binding on the actual valance. Self-hemmed means we just fold the fabric, sew it. Binding means we use a colour coordinated colour binding which matches the colour of the fabric and it runs along that outer edge. You can, on these awnings as well, ask us to extend the bottom rail to overall size. Now what that means is the bottom rail is made a little bit wider. It'll fit just within the inside of the head box. What it does though, it enables you to get the arms to that, I guess, outermost fixing point if need be. Sliding arm set. A sliding arm set is an extruded aluminium piece which is fitted to the wall separately, and it allows, turn it up the right way, and it allows you to move your arm mounting point. Now, the sliding arm set is normally 300 millimeters shorter than the arm size. So if you've got a 900 arm, your sliding arm set's going to be 600. It can allow you to, I guess, have more flexibility with the angle that your awning is coming out. And whilst it's not a folding arm awning, you could create an awning that came out at a much shallower angle by obviously sliding that up. So sliding arm set, another option. Double casement. We do offer what's referred to as a double casement. Can be ideal if you've got an outwardly hinged window or perhaps a door. You want a pivot arm awning, but you need some clearance. So a casement pivot arm actually has two sets of arms and it has another rail. So another rail that would come along roughly there, and you would create an awning that had a pitch to it. The arms are connected by chains, so that as the first arm comes out, it'll pull that next arm with it when the chain reaches the extremities. The chain is then also anchored back to, I might just retract that awning, anchored back to the underside of that head box. Is that right, Trev? Yeah. So, as I said, the chain is anchored back to the underside of the head box. In this scenario with a double casement pivot arm, this is probably the only scenario where I can think you might release some spring tension on the arm. So the secondary set of arms, which realistically aren't coming down very far and are going to be pulled out by the chain anyway, those two arms, you could certainly release the spring tension on those two arms. Now, System 2000, whether it's auto lock arm or whether it's pivot arm, the vast majority of System 2000 that we do come with the head box. It is a very stylish head box. It really finishes the product off. I think it gives it more of a premium look. But you can do it without the head box, and you can just have the universal bracket. Now, it's not the most attractive looking bracket. I don't think anyone would agree with that, but It certainly can suffice if the head box isn't required, can't be fitted, won't fit, there's not enough room for it. You can use this universal bracket. Spoke about that brick fix bracket. If you want to spread the load out over more bricks, then you can certainly do that. Now we also have, Rev's got a few other brackets. If you've got to, I guess, mount to something and you don't have the ability to, what's the right, I've lost the wording now. You've got to have both sides the same. You have to have both sides obviously fitted level, and sometimes on some older homes, particularly in Sydney and the homes built in the 70s, the window is actually not built out at all the same level. So if you need to use that as a build out, so you can build out the head box or the mounting point for the arm, you'll be able to do that in lots of those scenarios. You can also get corner brackets as well. So if we're fitting to the corner of brickwork and we're coming out, it will give us a further extended fitting point that might be necessary. There's also an adjustable 135-degree bay bracket window as well. So if you've got a scenario where people want awnings over a bay window, you can't fit them all in nice and neatly. You've got to stand those awnings out. So you have that scenario there.
Now you'll notice that the bay window one and the corner one are silver plated, whereas the Hunter Douglas adjustable standout is gold.
Yep.
Because we buy these in as needed from another supplier, so different colour.
Now the other thing that might be required is that you may need to put in a post. And again, some of the older homes, you may have a fixing point on one side of the awning, but where you've got the other extreme point, there's nothing to fix to. So you can order up a 38 by 38 millimetre post with top fitting and bottom fitting, or you can swage out the bottom of the post if you're fitting to something that's sitting at an angle. So calling up that post is also another option.
What you can see I've done here, with my snips cut down the 4 things, I've actually cut those 2 off, and then I've bent the other 2 flanges to the angle of the brick sill.
Yep.
And then I will just drill a hole through there and there, fix that to the sill, and that allows me then to put my fixings, my arm or whatever onto that post.
Yep. So there's things that are there that will enable you to fit these awnings in virtually any application. They are on the order form. You can use on the ticker box order forms. You can mark them up and call them up on your order. Now, as I said, you can fit these awnings in a reveal. Sometimes you have a scenario where you've got to step out with the front room in the house and you're putting an awning on a window where you pretty well need to side fix on one side but face fit on the other. So when you're side fitting or you're reveal fitting, you need to call up some angle. So we stock here in the factory 50 by 50 by 3 mil aluminium angle, and you can call that up in various lengths depending on whether you want 130 millimetre length to secure your head box, 100 millimetre length to secure your arm, or any other length that you need to do something. Again, you can call that up on your order form. So all of the fixings are available to help you fit that awning. So as I said, I don't think you'll sell lots of tape, whether it's internal or external, because the motorisation options now are really starting to take over. This would be the most complicated install. A pivot arm awning that's motorised or crank operated is really, really straightforward, because fitting the head box is straightforward, the arms are straightforward. Motorisation obviously is then programmed depending on the motor and depending on the remotes that you've called up and ordered. That's it, guys. That's the System 2000 pivot arm operation.